The numbers of unaccompanied children, and these are usually teenagers, crossing the border could spiral from more than 16,000 this month to as many as 26,000 by a month starting in September. There's still no plans for the vice president to go down to the border. What is clear, and this is becoming more evident every day because Jen Psaki gets asked the question and has no answer, and that is, when is the vice president who's been put in charge of this going down there? Joining us right now is Senior Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice. He heads up our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State and Director of the CIA. So, Secretary Pompeo, let me ask you this. The Biden administration, I think, is going to ramp up something, and that's going to be blame the Trump administration, what you all were doing.
Jay, that seems like their only recourse at this point. Their policies have really created craziness down on our southern border. It took us a little while to get it fixed from what we were handed from the Obama administration, frankly. It took us a number of months to get it right. We had the courts throw out some of the early work we did. But in the end, we had delivered a foreign policy outcome that protected America, stopped drugs and traffickers and cartels from honing in on these people who are so vulnerable trying to make the walk from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And we had delivered a national security solution for the United States of America. They upended it. They flipped the switch without thinking about it. Without thinking about the repercussions of this. They thought, well, that's a Trump and a Pompeo policy. We're going to walk away from that thing. It is now showing that we had it right. We had the right end of the stick on this thing. We had protected and defended America, and they're refusing to.
You know, and now the numbers are dangerous for our country. It's always a problem, but you reach critical mass. Now, here's what I don't understand. We were talking about this internally, Mike, and that's this. Jen Psaki yesterday. Can I play this again? Let's go ahead and play it again. It was asked specifically about the Vice President Harris, going down to the region because she's now in charge of the policy. Take a listen, everybody.
Do you have an update on whether the Vice President plans to travel to Central America or to the border as part of her looking into the root causes of the immigration problem?
I don't have an update on her travel, but since you gave me the opportunity, it's important to understand and know that she is focused on addressing root causes in the region. And so travel, I would expect, would be there, the border, and expediting processing at the border, opening shelters, ensuring we're moving kids out of border patrol.
I'm going to jump in there. Secretary Pompeo, I need a translator for what she's saying because this whole, the root problem. Well, the root problem is we changed our policies.
Yeah. But when you hear progressive leftists talk about root causes, whatever form it's in, you know they're talking about something fundamentally different than the problem truly at hand. The root cause here that she's thinking of is something that's happening in Central America or something that's happening in Mexico. The root cause of the problem here is what's happening in the West Wing today. It's that the United States has made a fundamental decision to welcome illegal trafficking across our border, to do nothing to stop it, to put our men who are serving at ICE and CBP, folks that Ike went down to Mexico and saw with great frequency. The president traveled down there. Everybody from our senior leadership went down to try and solve this problem. We ultimately got it done right. When you hear them refer to root causes, you know they have no seriousness about actually addressing what really caused the current surge at our border.
The impact of not having the border security wall continue, is that significant?
Yes, walls matter. Walls matter from a physical perspective, and they matter from a deterrence perspective. Remember, one of the important things here, Jay, is that you have to make clear that people aren't going to be welcome to travel here unlawfully. If they see a green light, if they call their friends, if they text their friends who are here and say, yes, come one, come all, they will. You have to convince them. You have to make the case that you're not going to be permitted to come in here unlawfully. When you do, you can turn it off. You can convince these people not to make the inhumane trek across that Mexican terrain.
I've got two military men here. We've got Colonel Wes Smith, and then Mike Pompeo also served, of course, in the military. I want to run a question to Colonel Smith for a moment, and then I'm going to run the same question to Secretary Pompeo, and that is, we talked about this earlier, the use of military facilities to house these children and the impact that could have on military readiness, Wes.
Yeah, I mean, the military, as I said earlier, the bases are not designed for this. Does the military help out in humanitarian crisis? Yes, of course. But there are limited facilities on bases, and these facilities have other uses, and you might be able to put migrants in there for a while, but generally the places they use are barracks and other gathering facilities that are used for pre-deployment of troops and redeployment of troops.
So, Mike, I was going to ask you the same question because you had to deal with this in logistics in the military. I mean, they're because they have no other options, apparently. they're proposing using military bases to house thousands of these kids.
I think Colonel Smith has it exactly right. We looked at this as well. It doesn't make any sense except as an extremist matter for a temporary period of time. But that means you have to have the policy right. If you have the policy wrong, it's neither an extremist nor temporary, but in fact your agenda. It's what you're trying to achieve. And so to use these facilities for purposes they were not built, not intended, and which put at risk our soldiers from viruses and all the things that we know may be a real risk makes no sense. I regret that they've chosen to go down this path. I regret even more that they will have to continue to fill up more military facilities if this crisis continues.
What would you do if you were in charge? What would you do right now?
It's pretty straightforward. We had it right. I'd go back to the set of policies we had. We had Remain in Mexico. We had a series of protocols. We had agreements with the Mexican government. This was highly negotiated at the most senior levels, the most senior diplomatic levels. Myself, a gentleman named Counsel Ulrich Breckbiel. We worked in our CBP friends and ICE and DHS. All of us worked together to deliver a holistic solution that was humane and protected and preserved America. They ought to simply go back to that. I'm convinced that the leadership in Mexico and Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala would accept that. We ought to go back and make the case to them and get back to where we were. This would be the most humane, decent thing to do for everyone concerned.
Let me switch gears to China and Iran, because we analyzed yesterday, and we're doing a much deeper analysis of this new deal that was signed between the Chinese government and the Iranians, $400 billion over a 25-year period. How dangerous is this deal? And China is always trying to exert its influence now into the Middle East.
This is a fundamental fallout from an administration that has now chosen to take a different path with Iran. The Chinese talked about this deal while we were in office, but they didn't sign it because they knew they would have, by transferring this wealth, these resources, doing this deal, they would have violated U.S. sanctions, and that we would have held them accountable for violating those sanctions. The majority of those sanctions, by the way, are still in place. I hope the administration will begin to sanction Chinese officials for violating current U.S. law. Look, the connection between the two, it will essentially be Iranian oil for Chinese money, resources, and military power. Jay, you'll remember the arms embargo that was part of the crazy nuclear deal, the JCPOA, expired after 5 years. It's over. We did snapback. We made it. We continued to extend it, and the administration, in its first 60 days, undid that. So now the Iranians are free to buy Chinese weapon systems and to sell the Chinese crude oil. This is really a step backward for the Middle East peace and stability and for the security of the American people.
Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Senior Counsel for Global Affairs for the ACLJ. Thanks for your analysis, as always. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for being with us.
Sir. So long, Jay.